Hey, I'm Drystone Joe, and I want to cover some of the basics to consider when redoing stone flatwork. The entranceway to this house, which is 8 foot by 4 feet, has got a couple of issues with it that call out for it being redone. Some of the criteria to keep in mind when redoing stonework is to, 1, keep a very smooth plane across the top surface, so that there's no irregularities where the stones come together. 2, to have really tight joinery between the stones to prevent plants and natural succession from growing up in between them, also to make them easier to clean. 3, the stones should be immobile. You don't want to have stones that are moving as you walk across them or that dislodge during the earth's natural movement cycles. Another important criteria to keep in mind is that the soil and gravel beneath flatwork be compacted either with a manual tamper or with a gas-powered plate compactor. And then the final criteria to keep in mind in doing flatwork is that where stone flatwork is up against a building or house, it should have a slope away from the house so that rain, water, and organic matter naturally go downhill. This entranceway here has got a couple of challenges inherent in how it has been made, and we're going to look at each one of those. Some of the problems that exist with the stonework that has been built at this entranceway are very evident in walking across it and in looking at it. One of the problems is that the top surface of the stones has a lot of variation. Instead of having a single flat plane, there are differences in the elevation of stone, which makes it a challenge, especially in walking in an area that has so much foot traffic, like the front door of this home. Another problem with one of the ways this has been constructed is that there are very significant gaps in between the stones. For example, right here, there's about a 2-inch gap. And what happens when that much space is allowed between stones, organic matter accumulates. Once the organic matter accumulates and breaks down, it becomes an ideal medium to grow plants. First grasses, then sometimes brambles, and down the road trees if it's not maintained. So the wider the gaps that exist between stones, the higher the maintenance is. Another issue with some of the stones in this walkway is that they're not large enough. This stone, for example, is only 3/4 of an inch thick and is smaller than the size of my hand. This isn't appropriate for a range of reasons. It's not safe for walking on. Stones that are loose like this do not meet the ADA criteria for walkways. Also, stones that are this small tend to dislodge quite easily, not only with foot traffic, but with the Earth's natural patterns of expanding and contracting during the seasons. The bed of this stone entranceway has been made up of really fine sand. One of the problems in using sand as a base is that there's not much mass to it and there's not much friction. It moves easily, especially with rainwater. One of the problems in using wood for edging against stone is that wood ages at a different rate than stone. Wood will deteriorate much quickly than stone will. It also has a tendency to warp. So with the challenges of rotting and with warping, wood is not a good choice in using for edging for stones. A better choice is stone itself, and a distant second is metal. In order to replace this entranceway, I'll be using metal edging as the perimeter. One final shortcoming in the construction of this walkway is that some of the stones have been sloped going towards the house instead of away from it. With this 6-foot level, when I set this to gauge the direction of the stone, several of the stones are sloping towards the house. Ideally, a walkway is level left to right this direction, with a slight slope away from any structure that the stonework is next to. Proper repair of this entranceway is going to require removal of the stones, removal of the wood edging on both sides, compacting the soil beneath, compacting crushed gravel beneath, setting a perimeter of metal edging, and then reshaping the stones, bringing in some larger and thicker stones to complete the walkway. I've outlined the perimeter of this entrance with a couple of markers. I've hung strings from the corner of the roof overhang to show the two outside corners away from the house. I've also got edging that matches the dimensions of this entranceway, which is 8 feet wide and 4 feet away from the house. The tools I've used to complete the restoration of this entranceway are a 7-inch electric angle grinder, a 4-inch electric angle grinder, a soft mallet for tapping down the stones, a carbide-tipped mason's hammer, a prybar, what's called a drywall square, which I use in marking stones, knee pad, 2-foot level, bright mason string, tape measure, pencil, and a 6-foot level. After removing the stones from the entranceway, I've marked the remaining stones that I'll cut with an electric grinder. This is a cutoff grinder with a diamond blade on it. I'll use protective eyeglasses, earplugs, and a dust mask to make the cuts. I've got to cut these existing stones so that I can place the 3 pieces of metal edging in this existing 8-foot by 4-foot area. Now that I've removed all of the original stone walkway and the wood edging, I excavated and graded the soil and compacted with a mixture of small gravel and sand. I've put metal edging along both of the 4-foot long sides and across the 8-foot width right here. Drove stakes in to secure that metal edging. And now I'm about to go start making my cuts. When laying flat work, it helps to always start from the perimeter and work in, especially for specific angles like a right angle at the 4 corners here. So I'm going to cut the 4 largest stones from on site into right angles and place them in the 4 corners. I've also made some marks with the red tape here at an exact level left to right coming out of the house. And I set the 2 4-foot pieces of metal edging coming away from the house at a slight downhill so that rainwater and organic matter automatically go downhill with the help of gravity. I've picked the 4 largest stones on site and am marking them to get the best possible right angles I can out of each one. This drywall tool I have used for marking stone with success for quite some time. I've run the length of it down a relatively straight edge on this stone, and then I've marked this line on it with a pencil. This is the line I'm going to cut. That way I can get the maximum amount of right-angled stone out of this one. If you don't have or can't purchase a drywall piece, you can also use a framing square. You can't quite get the same distance with it, but pretty close. So again, here's my right angle, and I'll use a pencil to mark this outside edge of it. And in using something shorter like the speed square, you simply have to extend the straight line to get as much cut as you can. Okay, I've got my ear protection, eye protection, dust mask. I always use the guard on a angle iron, a cutoff saw. Now, because these curved shapes are much harder to set other stone against, I'm going to go ahead and mark them for straight cuts. I'm going to make a straight cut here to here, and I'm going to make a straight cut from that corner to that corner. When I'm making a cut with a saw, I always turn the blade in slightly to undercut the edge so that it's easier to butt one stone up against whatever is on its edges. And then again, I'll make a mark here to connect the 2 outside corners. It's much easier to set another stone with straight cuts up against one with straight cuts than to do so much shaping with curves. Curves are possible and look nice. However, that takes a lot longer. And then I always turn the part of the stone I'm cutting to hang over whatever workbench I'm using. So now I have about 1 inch to 2 inches overhang for the mark I've made across the edge. The step I've just completed on the entranceway repair is to establish the perimeter. I've cut all of the stones to go around the perimeter of the 8-foot by 4-foot entranceway. The tools I've used in setting those, I've used a 2-foot level and a 6-foot level to make sure I'm level left to right on the walkway and that I'm sloping away from the house, a slight downhill slope away. I used a tape measure and pencils to mark the stones before I made the cuts, and I've used the lightweight rubber hammer to tap in stones instead of a heavy metal mason's hammer. I've also used a string as a gauge to establish the plane across the top. I have really tight joinery from my saw cuts. I have a consistent plane sloping away from the house. It's consistently level across left to right. And the final step is going to be measuring and cutting the stones to fill the interior of the entranceway. I'm going to try and use the largest stones I can first, and then work my way down to smaller size. In order to shape the flat stones to fit the entranceway, I set them in place, and I'm going to mark with a pencil and the level to match the straight lines of the stones on the 4 sides. So using the sharpened pencil and my 2-foot level, I'm making a mark to trim off the excess edges of the stones. I'm lining up the 2-foot level parallel to the stones beneath for my cuts. I've got my 4 sides marked. I'm ready to cut. I have the 4 sides of the stone marked for cuts. I've got my safety gear. I have snug fit gloves on, dust mask, ear protection, and eye protection. I'm going to cut the edges with a 4-inch electric grinder and a 7-inch electric grinder that have diamond blades on them. When making a cut on a stone, instead of cutting straight down with the blade, I undercut the edges of these stones just slightly so that it makes it easier when I'm setting them against others. As a base for flat work, several different materials end up getting used, and here's two examples. Here's some fine sand, which is what was existing beneath this flat work, and here are some small, what I call crushed gravel, about the size of a pinky fingernail. The differences in these two materials beneath flat work: the sand does not have much mass and does not have much friction. It moves around real easily with rainwater, with movement of stone above, with movement of earth below. The crushed gravel has more friction and is less likely to move in rainwater. So beneath flat work, I like to use crushed gravel as a base because of the fact that it has more friction and helps hold the flat work in place longer. I'm setting the final interior piece on the bed of gravel. And in this initial setting, this back edge is pretty well close to level, but the piece is ramping up just a little bit. This edge is now high. I can tell it visually. So I'll use a soft mallet to tamp it down a little bit and see if that's going to be enough. If not, I'll remove a little bit more of the crushed gravel. Not quite enough, so I'll have to take some out.